What's going on, everybody? This is the blockchain backer bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Today, we'll be taking a peek over here at the Bitcoin price chart, and we'll take a peek over there at the altcoin market. We're going to spend quite a bit of time in this video dissecting previous Bitcoin bear markets to compare it to how Bitcoin's price action is playing right now. There's a lot of opinions out there on which way Bitcoin's going to go, and we're going to take some time to really dissect here how have previous bear periods for Bitcoin played out. As we could see, once again, Bitcoin was unable to close above the 200-week moving average for the fourth week, with the fourth week almost kind of touching that 200-week moving average right there, almost as if it was a back test. So this is not looking too promising over here for Bitcoin at this point, that it's unable to clear from it and that it's actually kind of almost back tested it at this point. Also on the shorter time frame, we were pointing to how the 200 moving average on the 4-hour time frame has kind of been like the downtrending hold down in here, and that as we were at the end of Friday, that, you know, look, this is where we were at over here on Bitcoin. We were approaching this moving average in here. We're also we're stuck underneath here, at least similarly we were stuck underneath over here, and that the 200-week moving average sits within right in here when we take it off and we put it onto the weekly time frame at the same time. So there was a lot of resistances that were sitting right there, and that it was holding us back at the time. As we could see, the same thing was going on there for Ethereum as well, and Ethereum actually did get much closer to touching that at the same time, also reaching that upper boundary of the range that it's been within and pulling back throughout the weekend ever since it got to it. So the resistances are still holding up there. At the same time as we're starting the new week, the US dollar currency index continues its march up in here this morning. It might have poked up and set a new little high in there. Yeah, it did set a new little high, put on smaller time frames. You see there's the poke up there over there on the DXY. So the US dollar currency index is still really strong in here. Not typically a good sign for cryptos. You can look back to the last, 20 years or so to see where we're at within retracement levels and the zones that we're in within here. And, the question is whether or not is it going to stop within retracements as it has in the past? Like in this past one right in here, it stopped at the 50% retracement level, nearly right on the button. But as we can see, we've gotten past 50%. We've gotten past 61.8, past 702. The only one remaining in there is the 786. So question still remains, is this just a retracement, or are we in full-blown breakout for the US dollar currency index? And I don't have the answer for that or the way to guess on that one. But I could show you where we are within retracement levels, at least for the last 20 years. But as this dollar is currently strong, that's typically bad for most assets. So we'll take a peek here at Bitcoin. We'll talk about different bear markets for Bitcoin, what they've looked like in the past, and kind of the things that, I spent some time kind of researching out there to see, what is the grand consensus out there amongst a lot of people right now on what's happening with Bitcoin. So we'll kind of talk about those things right now. Kind of, there's a lot of comparison out there of Bitcoin to the past and how deep it needs to go, and the structure of it is, whether or not the bear market started here, whether or not the bear market for Bitcoin started here. Do we go based on percentages of the drawdown? Do we go based off of the structure of the drawdown? So I'll kind of present kind of the challenges that are there with that to kind of paint a picture on, where we're at right now, kind of comparing to different moments in time of where we have been before. But what I'd like to do for Bitcoin is I'd like to move over to actually the Bitcoin market cap. As many of you know who've been followers of this channel, we've been looking at the top of the Bitcoin price chart has been in for a very long time. The question has been is what kind of structure is it going to make on its way down? How will the altcoin market be impacted by that? We've had no retracement happen on Bitcoin. It's been essentially a straight line down with a 4-month pause that happened in here. And then we all know all the contagion things that happened the second that broke right there. But now the question is, what comes out of here, right? Does this thing, reverse itself and work its way back up and then go off and set new all-time highs? Does it have a reversal with just a standard retracement heading back into retracement levels in here, roll over and then have a much longer bear market in here? Or does it have kind of what I think a lot of people are really kind of cheering for at this point, is that we just go ahead and head straight on down in here and get the whole thing over with, and then we can start marching our way back up and head into a new cycle? There's a lot of challenges on figuring out which one they are, because bear markets are incredibly difficult to navigate. And then, of course, there comes the challenge of whether or not, like we've shown in the past on this type of structures, which of course is being deemed the McDonald's structure in here, that these can break down, recover, and then set a new high, and then end up falling all the way back down. And all of these things are very hard to figure out at this exact moment. But we'll talk a lot about the challenges on why it's difficult to sit here and to try to compare this to a lot of the past data that we have. In regards to a lot of on-chain stuff, I see a lot of people saying, hey, these indicators are dipping down into historic levels of where this has typically been the bottom. I've seen it all over Twitter over and over. Lots of different metrics indicating that this is the bottom and that the price of Bitcoin can recover from here. I also see lots of people, the common thing, of course, is that, if you look back to the past of these different bear markets that Bitcoin has had, in particular from 2018 and from 2014, they dip about 84, 85%. So if we're not there yet, right, where does that get you down into? It gets you down into like the $10,000 to $14,000 price level. Well, we're not there right now, right? We're sitting at 20,400 as I'm recording this Monday morning. And then, if we kind of go off of time, right, we say back to the top of the Bitcoin bull market back in 2017, December, to when the bottom of it came in here in December, it was a full year right in here, right? So we also look back to 2014 and say, hey, the top came in November, the bottom came in January, about a year and 2 months. So you got 1 year here, you got a year and 2 months. So if we just, use that and say about a year or about a year and 2 months, the time period that it's going to get you out to is right around here in November. So if we just go based off of time compared to the last two, you say, well, we still have at least 4 more months left of this before any type of true bottom can actually end up being marked. But that's really all that is. It's taking those two different bear markets, and that's saying, because these two, this one took a year and 2 months, and this one took 1 year on the button, that we have to take a year here. To make the time prediction for November for the right here, that's really all that is. That's taking those two bear markets and saying, because it took this long last time, this is how long it's going to take this time. So why would we ever want to say, hey, it could take this long because that's what it takes last time? Well, because of the fact that the top of this did actually come in here in December, which means it was like a 4-year cycle, right? So what do you have every 4 years? You have the 4 years block reward halving that happens on Bitcoin, where the reward to miners gets cut in half. So the assumption is we are still moving on 4-year cycles, and based on the 4-year cycles and based on how we've operated over the last 8 years, it would indicate it's going to take a whole year for it to work its way all the way down. And since the top came in here in November of 2021, we're not going to get a bottom till somewhere around November, December, January, either late 2022 or early 2023. But as for the time prediction, that's really the extent of it. Saying because we have these 4-year cycles, because we have the 4-year block reward halving, and because the last two bear markets took about a year, the assumption is we have to take a year this time. But I have some problems with this, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But essentially, we can take these previous bears, we can line them up to right here where the peak of this actually ended up happening. Grab this one in here, put it right here on the peak of where the top came in 2021 to see that, look, we're still not there. There's still more time that's left in here. But I have presented challenges that come with that, because structurally of what has happened here with Bitcoin during this time frame, it has looked very different in regards to what euphoria looks like, right? So we know that back in 2017, especially all the people who were here, the peak euphoria moment of cryptocurrency all came in right in here. The peak moment of 2013 and 2014 all came right back in here. We know for certain the peak moment of cryptocurrency all came in right here back in 2021. Back in March, April, and May, when Elon Musk was on Saturday Night Live, Laser Eyes, Diamond Hands, you had all those celebrities over there on Twitter posting about cryptocurrency. And most of the altcoin market, most of it topped right here. Similarly to like back in 2017, or at least 2014, 2013, that this was not the moment of the top for the whole market, but that this was really the chaotic, fun, crazy time where everything was really exciting. And that when we grab these past fractals of bear markets, if we're going to apply this ideology to it, that this is how it's going to work, then we can see that even that matches up a little bit better from a time perspective, that the peak of the market happened back in here, and that fractally, that this market has behaved very similar to what happens deep into a bear market. And even grabbing the fractal from back in 2018 in here, we noticed that was the same fractal that was playing out up in here, which, as we all know, we've overlaid this on here on Bitcoin several times to show the incredible insanity of how this deep bear market fractal showed up on Bitcoin from the peak of the market that actually came from way down in the depths of a bear market, which is similar to what happens after a top had come in well ahead of time back like when Coinbase had IPO'd, and that we were much deeper into this thing, even though price was marching higher, and even though it did go out and reach a 4.236 extension. So I'm not saying which one it is. I'm not saying that it has to go on to the November. I'm not saying this is the absolute bottom, but I can present right here why there's the challenges of having conviction on either way, on how you can say this is where the actual bear market started. However, it was also indicating that this is where deep bear market fractals were playing out from. And we do all know this was the exciting time of the market. What happened in here was absolutely nothing compared to what happened back in here, back in March, April, and May. And we can even look over here at the Google Trends data, searching for Bitcoin to see back in here, where's this January of 2021? Where's the remaining peak of this in here? May of 2021. Then what happens? Interest falls off. And here we go, November and December of 2021. When this peak came in here for Bitcoin, we could see that retail interest wasn't even here anymore, at least not at the levels that we had seen earlier in the year during the previous market cycle top. So the whole point of this is just saying, figuring out how long it's going to take based on time. There's a couple of really big challenges that are happening in there, because the price action that is playing out in here, if you were to even assume that we were actually operating still on 4-year cycles, or if we're acting similar to how behavior has acted in the past, is that we have to at least acknowledge things are not as clear cut as that, because we know that the excitement of the market came in here. We know that this is a bear market fractal that was taken from the depths of a bear market. And we know that the market has behaved in a straight line down, similar to what happens as you are actually deeper into a bear market in here. And in particular, really like what happens way back in here. Take all that off the screen, grab that again. From the time perspective, we're acting a whole lot more like our top did come back in there in April, and that this downward price action that we've had in here with no retrace is very similar to what the ending price action looked like for Bitcoin back in 2014, and that we know this fractal is the same as this fractal, and that the price action that we just overlaid over there on Bitcoin from back in here, right there, also comes from this time period as well. So why are those points in time significant right in here is because Bitcoin had already done its like pre-crash in here. Bitcoin had already crashed like 70% in here. Bitcoin had already crashed like 70% in here and went on and had a bounce and then rolled over and just went like straight down into capitulation in here in both of these situations. So fractally, what has happened in here for Bitcoin, this does not appear anything like what had happened at the previous tops for Bitcoin coming off of this time period, in which there were a lot more bounces that were moving their way up in here. And we could see we've had no real bounces happening in here, and that the price action is behaving much more like what happens at the very end of capitulation coming in here after peaking way back in here. So the point being, right, is that if anyone is to assume that this is going to behave just like this behaved, that it's going to behave just like this behaved, well, there were two elements that happened in both of these market cycles that have yet to happen in here. And that's that Bitcoin fell 70%, Bitcoin fell 70%, and then Bitcoin had a 100% bounce. So Bitcoin at this time has had a 73%. That already in itself is more than what happened during this fall, and that's more than what happened during this fall. And that in both of these, right, this one goes down 68%, this one goes down 69%. So it's already had a bigger straight line fall. And if you're going to assume in any way that this is going to take the same amount of time as this, same amount of time as this, and it's going to operate like this because that's how it's operated in the past before for the last two times, then everybody should be looking for a 100% bounce happening in here in Bitcoin, bringing the price back to like $40,000. If you're going to assume that it's going to behave exactly like this, which I think there is a lot of assumption out there, is that we're going to act the same way as we've acted in the past. Otherwise, kind of opening up the mind to saying, hey, there might be something different at play here with Bitcoin, rather than sitting here and saying, it's got to take a whole year for this to play out. It's got to take a whole year for this to play out, because structurally, it's already very different than both of these at this point. This behavior that we've had happen in the market shows that euphoria came back in here, and that the time period that is happening in here is acting way more similar to what happens at the ending phases let me re-grab that again, happening like what happens right here at the ending phases of a market rather than at the beginning phases of a market, bear market for Bitcoin. Because if you assume that it's actually acting like these things, well, then everybody out there should be looking for a big, massive bounce to be coming in here for Bitcoin to get you back up to right around $40,000 because the price is falling straight down with no bounce. So I could definitely get on that camp a little bit more to say that if we saw a bounce come out of Bitcoin and then it rolls over like this, man, yeah, then you're acting just like what happens before another capitulative move comes in here. But right now with where we're at here currently, I don't think we can compare it to this and say it's the same as this. So we have to say, or at least I have to say, something else at play is actually happening in here. And what could that be? And the logical thing that I see is that, hey, we're working on the ending phase of capitulation in here, similar to how we were working on the ending phase of capitulation in here, and the fact that we pulled the bear market fractal from in this time period here and have been working on a capitulative move. That would make logical sense to me. The other thing that has to happen in here for me is to say, okay, well, what are the things that we've talked about with this market for the last couple of years is that the expectation was that Bitcoin would get up into these price levels right in here, and that's where the top of it would come in. I can tell you personally, some of that, everybody wants to say, hey, the Fed, hey, all these narratives, all this, all that. But for those who are followers of the channel, this was the expectation the whole time, man. This was from way back in here before the price ever took off on Bitcoin that this is where we would go. Well, hey, this is where we get to. Price crumbles from here. Now we're all screaming the Fed and all that different kind of stuff. But I always say, it messes with your mind a little bit, right? That, whether you believe, there's a moving hand behind the scenes, or is it an act of God, or is it the powers that be, or is there manipulation and control beyond your understanding, is that, the price reacted to where the price was reacting. We were screaming about the price reacting there the whole time. So the question comes, well, what is the whole structure that has played out here for Bitcoin? And it's similar to what super cycle endings look like. And that when we look back through the history of Bitcoin and we go back to 2010 when the price of Bitcoin was 5 cents, working its way all the way up to $69,000, what has happened on this price chart to work its way up? I think if you're just going to use just your basic eyesight and you look at it, you say to yourself, hey, it's moving up this rotating curve and it's just going to keep on working its way up in here, right? That's what our eyes would see in here. But my eyes see something different going on in here, and that, we'll ignore these illiquid wicks that happen for Bitcoin here, taking it from 6 cents down to 1 cent in here, but just looking at these candle closes, and that we've pointed out that these bull markets for Bitcoin that have happened in here have been of equal magnitude each time. And that this is really the first mega cycle here in 2010 and 2011. And then you have your next mega super cycle lasting from, 2012 through 2013. And then our next mega super cycle is over here. And everybody assumes that this was the completion of a mega cycle and we started another mega cycle, but know that this was actually the same pit stop that happened in this super cycle over here. It just was stretched out over a much longer period of time, because what we can see here is here's kind of your top up in here, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So it runs up, it crashes, it retraces, it reaccumulates, and then it breaks out and goes. And that's exactly what happened over here for Bitcoin, is that it runs up, it crashes, it retraces, it reaccumulates, and then it goes. But that these operated on different time frames, however, structurally they're the same thing, and then boom, one more push off and off and away we go. So what would that mean, right? That would mean that, hey, we've actually just completed now 3 of these major super cycles that have happened in here, where this is the peak of number 1, this is the peak of number 2. Everybody thinks this is the peak of number 3, but really that was this time period in here, and that actually the peak of number 3 is back over here. So you have 1, 2, 3. And so in the event of 1, 2, 3, what does that actually give you? That actually ends up giving you an Elliott wave on a super cycle of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3 mega cycles on the log scale of equal magnitude. And the ending phase of it coming in here with a, back over to the market cap chart, 4.236 extension after a crash, retrace, reaccumulation, 4.236 extension. And that if we look at something similar to this type of structure that happens after a big mega super cycle has run its course, like it did for Ethereum back in 2015, 16, and 17, what ended up occurring at the very end ended up having a 4.236 extension after having a crash, retrace, reaccumulation, and then a breakout to 4.236 extension, and then a fall all the way back down. And where does it get back down into? It gets back down into these levels right here near the all-time high in here, right? Then it ends up bouncing its way back up into this breakdown level in here, before then rolling over and going way deep into a bear market. So what would you say for Bitcoin? Could we be somewhere similar to that, right? So here's the all-time high in here. Here's this whole area. What would look similar to something like that? It'd be like a bounce back up into here, and then what? Then way down for Bitcoin back into the 2000s, potentially even the 1000s. That right there will anger a lot of people. I already know it. Fortunately for most, if you look at the structure of how this has behaved in here, like it behaved for Ethereum and the way it's behaving for Bitcoin in here, is that when Ethereum was having its fall, it was doing standard corrections, right? It's 702 Fibonacci retracement in here. Then it ends up doing another retracement back to the 618 right back in here. And then it ends up doing another retracement back to the 786, a little over the 702, 786 back in here. So there was nice retracements happening for Ethereum heading on its way down all of these waves till it finally rolled over and really went super deep. And obviously we've had none of that happen over here for Bitcoin. It's been acting for Bitcoin much more like what happens at the ending phases in here. But there's no question that the structure that we have, the ending structure, if this is the fifth wave that we've presented this over here on Ethereum to show how deep it can go in a super long bear market for Bitcoin if it were to do something similar to that. So that's the challenge here too, is that Bitcoin, has it completed some type of mega super cycle, the third one, and this time it's going deeper into a correction. That'll take a lot longer to play out before we can restart to do another whole 5 waves. So there's a lot of challenges in here. And I don't think it's as clear cut as just saying, hey, these last 2 bear markets, they lasted a year long each. And due to that, we are going to last the same amount. There's so many elements that are different in that, hey, we just completed the third major super cycle for Bitcoin. The peak euphoria of the market actually ended up happening in here. And the phases that we're acting like, the behavior that we're acting like in here is more so like that of what happens at the ending phases of these as well. And is Bitcoin actually working on something completely different in which it's like this super long bear market for Bitcoin heading deep, 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 like into the 2000s. But the thing is, for anybody out there believing that we are going to take the same amount of time in this phase as we are in these, there's no question that how we're acting right now from this peak is not the same as how we acted from the peak of the last 2. And if you are to assume that we are acting like that in both circumstances, the prices bounced right back up into here. And you can see that on both of these. I'll shift this over here. You can see that by the time we got down in here, the price ended up bouncing back up higher. And we can see that over here on this one as well. By the time prices got down in here, we bounced up higher. So if anyone's anticipating that we're acting like previous bear markets and comparing things to like previous bear markets for Bitcoin, you would think people would be saying, hey, a bounce is probably likely. If this thing's going to continue for 6 more months, there's probably some big bounce that's coming out in here. I'm not so convinced that this is how we're behaving because we just haven't acted like that. This has acted way more like way back in here. And, it's not telling us, hey, this is the absolute bottom because this fractal says that it's the absolute bottom, but it's certainly behaving a whole lot more than what happened back in here. And even for those who anticipate that we're acting like we were back in here, we've had no bounces along the way like we did in the past. And after a depth of this fall in both bear markets, they both provided 100% relief rallies. So yeah, some of the challenges over there in Bitcoin and where it's at right now. And then, of course, not to mention the one thing that is drastically different about Bitcoin right now is that this guy, right? So you've got that 200-week moving average sitting there. So I'm not too quick to compare Bitcoin's current price action to being the top like we saw back in here or the top that we saw back in here happening from right here. On-chain data-wise, it makes a whole lot more sense that from retail perspective and market exit perspective, all the exiting really happened back in here. And that, we can even see at this point, look how oversold we are on the weekly time frame. By the time we were this oversold back in here, you're at the bottom. By the time you were this oversold back in here, you were at the bottom. But of course, if this is a crash, retrace, reaccumulation, you saw what happened over there with Ethereum. But like every single one of these examples, Ethereum showed a bounce that came out in here, back in here. Both of Bitcoin's previous bear markets, if you're to assume that, it's acting like that, both of those showed a bounce coming out of there. But again, this is why bear markets are so difficult to navigate. You're trying to use previous examples of how things have played out before and trying to guess which one is it. Ethereum's example, both of Bitcoin's examples give you a bounce back to about the $40,000 price range. That's if you're saying that this is the absolute top and we're going to apply this moment in time and this moment in time to saying that this is the actual top. But if you go based on the fractal and based on the behavior of what the price chart was actually doing, we know that the behavior of the chart right in here was acting just like the behavior of right back in here, and the entire fall that happened in here also acting like right back in here. And so there's the challenges that you have in there of saying, well, okay, is this the bottom of Bitcoin coming in here? If so, why are we underneath the 200-week moving average? That's not good. And then at the same time, you're having to say, can we even apply these models of these past ones in here, because the price of Bitcoin is actually coming way back down in here. But even in the example of it coming way back down in here, the example we have from at least Ethereum, not to say that it's going to follow Ethereum, but even from Ethereum's example, it bounced up in here before then working its way back down. So these are all like the bear market examples, right? But there's even examples out there to show how you could fall back down in here, accumulate, crash, and then you just recover back up in here, ABC from here, and then set one new high and then work its way down. So, and I don't see anybody really talking about that one out there, but that is why it's not clear cut out there right now. Which one do you choose? Do you choose and you say, this is the peak and we have to operate on these 1 year bear markets because that's what's happened the last 2 times? Or do you say the structure of the market was very different up in here and that we were presenting bear market fractals from the very top and that we're actually at the ending phase of this? Or do you say, you know what, Bitcoin's in full-blown crash mode, Bitcoin's done, $2,000 Bitcoin, that's the end of it? Because the reality is most models out there did not predict this as being the top. So we're using lots of these models to try to predict the bottom and say, where's the bottom coming in based on all these fancy metrics and all these fancy models out there. But those fancy metrics and those fancy models did not predict the top. While over here, we were screaming that the top was coming in merely because of that, merely because of the 4.236 extension being reached out on the Fibonacci scale here on the market cap chart, screaming, this is the top of Bitcoin. But all the fancy models did not predict it. So are all the fancy models going to be able to predict the bottom if they miss the top entirely? That's a big question. And this is why I wanted to just present all these challenges that are shown up in here on whether or not you can believe, is it going to take a whole year for this to play out? Is this the very end of this thing? Is it going to recover, or is it going to go into a bounce and then roll over on itself? And right now, with where the price of Bitcoin sits currently at this exact time, I don't see any way to actually pick one way or the other to say this is the one that's most likely to happen in here. Because if the thing just keeps crashing, then it's just a crashing market. There's not a whole lot to say about it unless it keeps crashing. The point of interest to say this is a big pivotal moment for Bitcoin is if Bitcoin finds some type of support and then bounces its way back up in here, we have many references to go back and look at and say, look, when this thing was staying in a big, fat, ugly bear market, this is where it held out underneath. And then if it gets through that level in there, what's the next one? Then it's going back to the last Fibonacci retracement levels. And if we get back to those Fibonacci retracement levels, we say, look, all these things have been completed. We've had Bitcoin sets a new high, Bitcoin sets a new low, Bitcoin goes back into retracement levels. Has the altcoin market done anything at that time? And then question is it lights out after that? But the first big moment would be if it got a bounce back up in here. So long as we're down in here, and if we're going to be using any of these moments in time from the past as reference points for them, even in both of these to sit here and say the bear market's going to last a whole year because of this, the bear market's going to last a whole year because of this. In both circumstances, after it had a 70% fall, which Bitcoin has, it had a bounce. It had a 100% bounce. So if you're going to apply this, or if you're going to apply this, you'd be sitting here saying, well, the next thing is a 100% bounce. Then it's like, well, what happens after that? That's the big story. If it keeps breaking down and it keeps going down lower and lower and lower, it becomes harder to argue we're acting like this because that's not what happened. This thing fell 70%, this thing fell 70%, and it bounced and it bounced and it bounced. And really, it was just kind of like finding support on top of this level till it finally broke, finding support on top of this level before it finally broke. We have not had anything like that. Where is it like holding on a support here before it finally breaks? Unless this ends up being the spot for it right here, and it just has to like torture people and then break. So either way, those are a lot of different thoughts that were going through my mind this weekend, and I just wanted to kind of show all of them to you. Maybe it gives you something to work with on the charts and you can kind of figure things out. Because while there were several altcoins that did set new all-time highs into Bitcoin here in October, November of 2021, 90% of the market got its top back here in this time period as well. Back in the euphoria phase of the market, the altcoin market peaked back in the euphoria phase, which is what happened back in here, back in 2017 as well. The euphoria phase happened in here at the peak of the market into the retracement of Bitcoin back in here. And then these lower lows were getting set as the price kind of waddled on. And that's what we also saw happen back here in 2021 and 2022. The peak euphoria phase for the altcoin market also even pointed to it happening back in March, April, and May of 2021. So it adds this extra, check mark into saying, if this is a full-blown bear market that isn't going to be like this, right? If it's not going down to $2,000 for Bitcoin, but it's actually just going to be a standard Bitcoin bear market in here, there sure are a lot of check marks pointing to the peak of this market happening back in here, not only for on-chain action for Bitcoin, not only for retail interest for Bitcoin back there at that time, which we know the retail interest in 2017 all came at the peak. Here we go, the peak, the top of Bitcoin's price action happening way back in here with reduced retail interest. But even the altcoin market was acting more euphoric back in this time period and not in this time period. So lots of food for thought. And that's why I find it very difficult to sit here and say that, the bear market for Bitcoin has to last much longer in regards to like comparing it from peak to trough like we did in 2014 and in 2018. I think the challenges there are saying, why did we present a bear market fractal here from the top, from the very, like we did back here in 2018, deep into a bear market? And why is the price action behaving like that of one that does at its final capitulation phase in here? And why did the altcoin market peak way back over here for the majority of the altcoins? So it's left with like multiple things. It's like, well, either like Bitcoin's in like this super mega crash happening here for it, or it's approaching near the end of it. And it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense on the charts to me to say that the peak of the market is acting like this, and due to timing and four-year cycles and block reward halvings, that the price action is going to act the same, because it's just not. So I don't know. Those are the challenges out there. There's a lot of the conflicts in my head. And until new price action emerges on the chart, and while we sit here in this area that we have for the last month now, it's kind of like deciding, are we going to break down from this 200-week moving average in here that we've not been able to cross back above, which has never happened before. It's certainly showing itself as resistance at this point. Are we going to work our way back up into here and get stalled out in there? We're going to work our way up into retracements, get stalled out in there. How's the structure going to look like bouncing off of here if it does, or if it's just going into full-blown crash? If it continues further from here, you have to like literally say it's definitely nothing like these two. It's nothing like these back in here, because in both of these, after you had your first initial 70% fall, you just had a lot of support building and a lot of retracing. You had a 70% fall, you had bounces, and then finally it broke down in here. If you keep going in here and you get beyond that 70%, I don't even think you can point to either one of these things as references, because it's just not. It's just straight line down. And I don't think these are reference points anymore, because they're just not acting like that. So we'll see. And lastly, not to mention, it was the market cap chart that was able to give us that 4.236 extension over here for Bitcoin. And we can look at where the price of Bitcoin is at right now. It is dancing right on top of that all-time high of Bitcoin from back in 2017. That happens to be the point we've come down to hit. While we've seen that price level get taken out on the Bitcoin price chart, on the Bitcoin market cap chart, the one that gave us the 4.236 extension, it has still held it. If it were to move down below there, it seems the most logical next place of support for Bitcoin's a little bit further. And this is in the 12,000s for Bitcoin. But even in that, if we assume it does that, right? If we assume it actually heads straight down in here, where could you even go to the past, anywhere in the past, to look at it and say, this is a structure we have seen before that is healthy for Bitcoin long term? There's no examples of it. There's zero examples of Bitcoin's history to show a fall of this type of magnitude straight from the all-time high that ended up proving to be healthy for Bitcoin long term. So I know a lot of people are actually kind of cheering for that right now. They're like, hey, let's get this on their way. Maybe they sold out, and because the market has been so uncertain, there's been so much contagion, don't know what to do. Hey, you know what? I'm going to step aside, let this market play out. Now kind of cheering for it to go down, right? Because what have you placed? You've placed your bets on the price is going to go down by selling, right? So people are naturally cheering for the prices to go down, not because they want Bitcoin to fail or they want cryptocurrency to fail. It's that they want to buy, but they want to buy cheaper than what they sold at. And so a lot of people will be cheering for prices to go down quickly and to go down right now, because then they can buy back in at cheaper prices. I don't think it really has to do with nefarious wanting or cruelty of saying, I want the cryptocurrency market to collapse on itself. It's just that the position of their bet is down. They're in cash. They want to see the price go down. They want to get back into the market, but they want to get back in it cheaper. So you see a lot of people cheering for downward price action. But if you got a downward price action straight from here, it would be real hard to sit there and say, this is healthy for Bitcoin's longevity, because Bitcoin always operates like this. Be like, no, we've never seen Bitcoin crashing at this velocity before. We've never seen it to where it's just collapsing on itself at this rate. But if you got some type of bounce and then worked your way and then start falling and be like, yeah, we have seen this before. Typically it falls 50% from this level, then it stabilizes itself and it starts working its way up. But definitely not in a circumstance where it just keeps going straight down. So that's why it's kind of for me too. It's well, if we keep going straight down, that's not anything like any of these time periods before. It will be very different, and it will still present challenges on whether or not is Bitcoin still healthy, or is Bitcoin actually working on even deeper crashes. So food for thought for those who are cheering for prices to fall down and fall down quickly from right here, right now. Where are the reference points to go back to say that's healthy long term? Another food for thought. I think the only way you really could do it is still by sitting there and saying that this was the peak in the market, and we have been working on that bear market fractal. It is the ending phase of the bear market, and that there's not much more left in it in here, and that we're just kind of working towards the end. But again, it still leans on the fact that this was peak, this is ending, and you'd have to have a stretched out fractal to say that was it. So I think that's the only real case out there to say that if it keeps going down, if it takes that level out, you'd kind of be leaning on this thing, which, I guess it's possible. But all right, guys, that'll be it for this one. I wanted to share that with you because those are a lot of the thoughts that have been going through my head. It feels like there's a lot of certainty out there on the market that, certain percentage drawdowns need to happen on Bitcoin and certain amounts of time needs to elapse for Bitcoin. But I wanted to present all of those different things out there that make it far more complex than just saying Bitcoin's operating like it always has operated, because it's definitely not. Even if it was operating like previous bear markets that it's had in 2014 and 2018, everybody would be expecting a 100% bounce from where we're at right now back to about $40,000. But we could see most people aren't expecting that out there. But at the same time, they're still expecting the bear market to last another 5 months or so. So a lot of things to think about, a lot of things to look at. A lot of complexities out there. We need more price action to print on this chart to give us a more clearer idea of what are we structurally looking like. And I think one of the big things out there is that we're still under that 200-week moving average, and we still just closed a fourth week underneath it. So lots of wild different things out there, including that dollar that just keeps on crushing it. So, all right, we'll keep an eye on it throughout the week. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you could be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice, and I am not a financial advisor. But if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.